exactly the way I'm used to opening a show, but then this isn't exactly the usual show. Hello and welcome to the 3rd Hilton Masters of Aerobatics. I'm Becky Dixon and hanging me, pun intended, is Charlie Hillard. Now, Charlie is a past world and national aerobatic champion. Together, we'll be your hosts for today's event. Wow, Charlie, that was incredible. I've always wanted to see the world from upside down, but that was a first. What about today's competition? What can we expect to see here?
Well, Becky, aerobatics is truly a three-dimensional sport. These pilots are flying high-performance aircraft. They're flying in what we call the box, which is an imaginary cube of air that's about 3,000 feet in each dimension. I guess if you wanted to compare this sport to gymnastics, if you could take away the gravity from a gymnast, he would be doing the same sort of thing that these pilots are doing in their aircraft.
The contest is composed of 3 flight sequences, a known and 2 unknowns. Each sequence in turn has 15 to 17 distinct maneuvers. The judges grade each maneuver from 0 to 10 depending on the skill with which it is executed.
And who are the competitors? Well, they're the absolute best competition aerobatic pilots from throughout the world. Peter Celliers, a businessman in his native South Africa, is his country's 3-time national champion and a competitor in the 1982 World Championships. Frank Fry, a captain for Trans-Australian Airlines, boasts 3 Australian national championships. Henry Haigh is a former U.S. national champion and a member of 6 world teams. At 61, Henry is the oldest world-class aerobatic competitor. Peter Kynsey is the current British champion and represented England at the 1982 World Championships in Hungary. Eric Mueller, an architect, is the current Swiss champion and a member of many Swiss teams in world and European competition. Gordon Price is an Air Canada captain as well as several-time Canadian aerobatic champion. He's also a designer of aerobatic airplanes. Patrick Paris is a pilot in the French Air Force and is the French aerobatic champion. He too has competed in several world contests. Christian Schweitzer, a pilot for Swiss Air Ambulance and Rescue, is 5 times the Swiss aerobatic champion and has competed in 7 world contests. Gene Soucy is a pilot for a major U.S. airline and a member of the famous Eagles aerobatic team. Gene is 3-time U.S. aerobatic champion. Kermit Weeks, an investment manager, is the current U.S. champion, winner of 2 gold medals in international competition, and winner of both the 1981 and 1983 Hilton Masters of Aerobatics. Okay, Charlie, let's go now to that competition. It's already underway. The first flight, the known, has been completed with Christian Schweitzer in first place, Gene Soucy second, defending champion Kermit Weeks third, and Peter Kynsey fourth. We're now into the first of those 2 unknown sequences.
These sequences are termed unknown because although the individual maneuvers are ones that pilots have often flown, the sequence is made up just for this event, and they're not allowed to practice it. That makes the competition a whole lot tougher. In fact, this may be the toughest unknown I've ever seen. This is Christian Schweitzer. He was in first place going into this flight, but has left out portions of 2 maneuvers that will cost him lots of points and drop him well down in the standings. He left out the 4th roll in this rolling turn.
I was concentrating me on the speed and then forgot to do the last mark.
Got to do the last roll. Yeah. How about the hammerhead with the snap roll coming down, the outside snap coming down?
Did I not do that?
Got it.
Really?
Yeah.
Those 2 mistakes were enough to drop Christian to 9th overall.
Here's Peter Celliers. He moved from 9th to 5th overall with this flight. He's positioning himself for a 3/4 vertical roll. What a pilot does between maneuvers is often as important as the maneuver itself. The judges look for accuracy of lines and angles as well as positioning in the box. Now he's pulling over upside down in preparation for the rolling turn. Talk about patting your head and rubbing your stomach. Peter must turn in a complete circle, maintaining constant radius and altitude while performing 4 complete rolls. How about that coordination? Look at just how well he does. His altitude is good, his rate of roll constant. He'll score very well on this one.
I asked Peter about aerobatic training for all pilots.
It's an absolutely must for every pilot, commercial, private, or whatever. because it does teach you a lot about yourself, a lot about self-discipline. I think it's a must for every pilot, safety-wise.
The only serious problem Peter had was right here. He entered this vertical snap roll without enough speed, then hesitated too long before beginning the snap. As a result, the snap roll isn't crisp, and he hasn't enough speed to continue the vertical line afterwards. Rather than the 8s to 9s he's been getting, he'll do no better than a 2 or 3 on this one. Too bad, Peter. Let's see how Peter Kynsey, our British champion, performs the same vertical snap roll. Kynsey pushes up to establish his vertical line, but notice that he doesn't wait as long before doing the snap. This way he has more speed to make a crisper snap and enough left over to continue the vertical line. The line isn't as straight as it could be. That will cost him some points.
Peter, this is your first competition in the United States. Compare competing here as to other places.
Well, the most significant thing is your fantastic weather. We always have weather problems in Europe. But generally, I think competitions are very similar throughout the world. We all work by the same rules. So the Russians are competing at the moment to exactly the same rules.
Now, you also fly in a lot of air shows. How would you compare that to aerobatic competition?
Airshow flying is very enjoyable, and while I wouldn't want to say it was a simple thing to do, this requires much more skill and concentration because your audience is that much more critical of you. There are other pilots and they're judges, and they really know what to look for.
Describe your feelings when you're up there competing.
I don't notice any sensations of G or anything like that when I'm actually competing. My concentration is entirely on just not making a mistake.
Peter's concentration was enough to land him 3rd overall after this flight. I mentioned earlier that this was probably the hardest unknown flight I've ever seen. Since the pilots picked the maneuvers, they've no one to blame but themselves. Here, each picks one maneuver for each of the unknowns.
Oh, God. Oh, Patrick!
One of the things that makes this sport so universal is the cataloging of maneuvers. All maneuvers are diagrammed using standard symbols, such as those here on the board.
Can I change that?
No, it's on the board. You've taken the chalk off the board, haven't you?
Once the sequence is prepared, the pilots will copy it onto a card on the instrument panel of the plane rather than trying to memorize it. Gene Soucy performs that same hammerhead turn with the outside snap roll that Christian forgot to do. The 260 horsepower Avco-Lycoming engine pulls him straight up until he is just about stopped. He kicks in full left rudder, pivoting the airplane straight down. Then he punches the Pitts into a violent, snapping roll. See how he seems to shrink down into the seat? That's 7 to 8 Gs, or 7 to 8 times his normal body weight, crushing him down. Any maneuver that forces the pilot into the seat like that is an inside maneuver. An outside maneuver, like this outside snap on top of the loop, tries to throw you quite literally out of the airplane. Here's where a good harness system is a must. That was a beautiful maneuver. The loop was round, not pinched on top, and the snap roll plays perfectly in the center. A beautiful flight for Soucy, who remains in 2nd place after 2 of the 3 flights.
Henry Haigh finished the first sequence in a rather disappointing 6th place, but wins this unknown, moving him into 1st overall.
Henry's setting up for a spin. He slows the Pitts until it stalls, hauls full back on the stick, kicks full rudder, and around he goes.
At age 61, what keeps you at this aerobatic competition?
I love the people involved in the sport. All these pilots are, you know, fine, fun people to be with.
Henry pulls up to vertical, establishes a nice line, does a beautiful 3/4 roll. He's pulling upside down now in preparation for the rolling turn. You'll see the strain and concentration on his face. Notice, too, he's constantly checking his ground references, making sure he stays in the box and keeps his rates of turn and roll constant. The only reference he has for the boundaries of the box are large white panels on the ground marking the outline. It's tough not to go out, and each out costs 50 points.
When you retire from the sport, if you ever do, and you look back on your career, what are you going to remember most? What memories stand out most in your mind?
Well, of course, I'm going to fly in a couple more world competitions, and I'd love to win one, but if I don't, I'm going to remember the world competition in Austria a couple of years ago that I missed being the world champion by 5 points out of 17,900, and that kind of stays with you.
Henry does win this flight, but his hold on first place is a slim one. Gene Soucy is only 13 points behind. For French champion Patrick Paris, this was the first competition in America and the first away from his own plane, the single-winged Cap 21. We talked about his impressions.
Patrick, I understand this was your first time to fly the Pitts. Compare that to flying your own airplane.
It's very different because it has 2 wings. So the Cap 21 has only 1 wing, 1 low wing. So it's very different for visual reference.
Do people ever ask you if you're crazy?
Ah, yes, very often.
There's more. Don't go away. Here's Australia's Frank Fry, winner of a bronze medal in the 1984 World Championships.
What is it about aerobatic competition that makes it become such a passion for you guys?
The thrill of competition. There really is a buzz. And you get such a pleasure out of doing a sequence and getting it all right. And you're really out there pushing yourself as hard as you can and trying to get through the sequence without making any errors at all. You've got to get through it without, you know, to make a perfect sequence really does give you a real buzz.
How would you describe your style?
I know I'm a tongue flyer. I fly with my tongue out. I really concentrate with my tongue.
The airplane you're looking at now is not that unlike the original Pitts Special built back in 1945 by this man, Mr. Curtis Pitts. Curtis, of course, the Pitts S2 is the competition aircraft being used here today, but let's go back to the original. Let's go back to 1945. How did it all begin?
Well, it all began by me wanting a plaything to play with.
Let's compare the Pitts Special to the Pitts S2, the original to the more modern version.
Well, the original was a very small airplane. It weighed something like 500 pounds, was powered by 55 horsepower. This airplane weighs about 1,100 pounds, and it's powered by 260 horsepower, and it carries 2 people instead of 1.
What do you think are the most important safety features of your airplanes?
Well, the strength of the machine is one thing. It's strong enough that the people can perform all these maneuvers without any worry of structural failure. It is able to recover from any attitude, any position, any maneuver that they can put it in, given enough altitude.
Here's Eric Mueller, architect, author, and stunt pilot for a number of films, including High Road to China, starring Tom Selleck.
When did you first become interested in flying?
Oh, when I was about 7 years old and I saw the airplanes in the war. We lived on the border and I was fascinated. And I knew I will fly, that's for sure.
Did you ever dream you'd be doing aerobatic flying?
Oh, that was the first thing I realized, that with an airplane you can have a freedom you never can have in another sport or another way. So that was always the dream.
What one piece of advice would you give a newcomer to the sport?
Fly high and work and work and work.
The last day of the competition, with the final deciding flight yet to be flown. Henry Haigh maintains that slim hold on first place. Gene Soucy is second, and Peter Kynsey third. Daybreak brings rain, and lots of wind. Plenty of time to go over that last unknown just one more time. By early afternoon, the weather cleared enough to continue.
Henry Haigh maintains that awfully slim 13-point lead going into this flight, but I think we're seeing the mistake that will cost him the contest. He's beginning upside down. The previous sequence began that way. This one doesn't. He seems to realize his mistake, but rather than recovering and going on, Henry is breaking off for a restart. Not only does he zero that maneuver, but he'll get a 200-point penalty for interrupting the sequence. That's nearly 400 points he cannot afford to give up.
Defending Masters champion Kermit Weeks goes into this flight well behind the leaders. He's not out of the running, but he can't afford any mistakes.
Kermit's done a half outside snap roll straight down. Now he pushes outside, doing in effect the bottom half of an outside loop, winding up in a vertical climb. Look at how smooth he is. That vertical land was ruler straight. He pushes over the top of the box, checks his position, pushes outside and down, does a quarter roll, then pushes inverted again. His next maneuver is technically called a Humpty Bump with a 3/4 snap on the up line. Here's the up line, the 3/4 snap. He continues the line, pushing over the top, the Humpty Bump, and straight down again. Very nicely done.
Kermit, my boy, how'd you do? Piece of cake if I didn't zero anything or leave something out.
Yeah, I thought you had an excellent flight.
Yeah, it felt pretty good.
Yeah. Framing was good. You didn't go out of the box, did you?
No problem. Wasn't bad at all.
But Kermit did go out of the box and received a 50-point penalty, enough to drop him from 2nd to 3rd overall.
Here's Gordon Price, who started badly, finishing 8th in the first flight, 6th after the second. He's more than made up for it with a winning performance in this flight. This is his Humpty Bump, finishing it with a perfect vertical down line. That'll score well for him. He's flying a terrific sequence.
When you retire and look back on your career in the sport, what are you going to remember most?
Well, I think competitions like this that are a real ball. You know, there is some prize money, but that's not the prize money so much. It's just the camaraderie. We've been here for 10 days practicing, having a real good time here, and we all have been helping one another, and we all laugh at one another's mistakes, and it's just, this is the most fun that I've ever had, is this type of contest.
Here's Gordon's snap on top of a loop. A tremendously large round circle with a very crisp snap right smack in the center. Look how nicely he continues the back half, finishing at precisely the same altitude as he started. A fine job by a very talented competitor. Here's another. Gordon setting up for a tail slide. Look how precisely he draws that vertical line. When he can't climb any further, he stops, slides backwards at least 2 plane lengths, then flops over and dives downward. A beautiful tail slide.
Gordon scores well enough to give him first place in this sequence, but not quite well enough to win it all. It's Soucy coming from behind to win the 3rd Hilton Masters of Aerobatics. Although Gene never finished better than 2nd in any of the sequences, his overall total put him in front by a solid 229 points. Let's watch. Rice finishes second, Kermit Weeks is third, and Henry Haigh fourth. Peter Kynsey is fifth, Patrick Paris sixth, Eric Mueller seventh, and Christian Schweitzer eighth. Peter Celliers finishes ninth, and Frank Fry 10th. This is Becky Dixon with Charlie Hillard, hoping you enjoyed the third Hilton Masters of Aerobatics.